We have three people involved today, London, Tokyo, and I will just introduce Cindy Yu, who's our moderator, and then I will leave it to her to take over from then on. So Cindy is assistant editor broadcast at The Spectator, and she also hosts The Spectator's Chinese Whispers podcast. She writes extensively for The Spectator, Foreign Policy, The Daily Telegraph, and among other things, she's recently covered the Taiwanese election. And she also frequently appears talking about Chinese-related issues for various television channels, the BBC, Channel 4, GB News, and so on. And on that note, I'm going to just tell you the timeline. We've set aside an hour and a half for this, so I hope there are lots of questions. But if not, it's possible we may wind it up a little earlier than that. But that's all up to Cindy, who is our moderator today. So I'll hand over to her now.
Jason, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thanks to all of you for joining us on this webinar today. It's a deeply important issue with global repercussions, and there are a lot of moving parts here, a lot of historical baggage as well. In my view, the Taiwan question isn't just one of whether and when China will invade, but also what might it do short of an invasion? Does the world know how to respond to those grey zone operations? And could deterrence actually trigger more action? I'm delighted that today we are joined by two brilliant experts who can help us make sense of this complicated situation. First, we'll be hearing from Dr. Ryo Sahashi, who is Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of Tokyo. He sits on various government panels advising on science and technology diplomacy, and is the author of numerous books, the latest being US-China Rivalry, A Shift of American Strategy and Divided Worlds. Also joining us today is Charles Parton, OBE. Charlie is a seasoned diplomat and has spent 22 years of a long career working in or on China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. He is a special advisor to the British Parliament's Foreign Affairs Select Committee and writes for numerous think tanks and papers, including for The Spectator. Now, Ryo and Charlie will each give a presentation of around 20-25 minutes, after which there will be an opportunity for you to ask your questions. As Jason just explained, please raise your hand on Zoom in order to do that. But if you also want to ask questions during the panel, put it in the comments, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible at the end. And yes, finishing in about just under an hour and a half. Okay, well, first of all, Ryo, let me hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Cindy, and thank you very much, Dai Foundation, for inviting me to this special occasion to speak in front of you. My name is Ryo Sahashi. I am now Associate Professor at the University of Tokyo, Institute for Advanced Studies on Asia. So it is a very good moment or timing to talk about Taiwan and the future of Northeast Asia or Indo-Pacific region in general. Because yesterday was inauguration speech and ceremony for the new president of Taiwan or Republic of China. So let me start to make my comment on the new president of Taiwan. Then let me, to discuss about the state of the U.S.-China relation and what is the Japanese policy and what will be the future and why we all, including my friends from Europe, have to think about Taiwan case so importantly. So let me start from my comment on yesterday's speech by new Taiwan President Lai Ching-te. As you may know, yesterday was the day to celebrate the new president of Taiwan. The name is Lai Ching-te. He was the vice president for Tsai Ing-wen, the female president of Taiwan for the last 80 years. And both people are coming from Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, in Taiwan. And also you may know President Tsai Ing-wen, the outstanding president of Taiwan. She was a little bit moderate type of person in handling Taiwan and Taiwan's foreign policy. And the rumor said, new President Lai Ching-te, he has some inclination to say Taiwan independent, in quotation, So the situation over Taiwan or Taiwan Straits could be very shaky. But actually, yesterday's speech is not that big surprise. And yesterday's speech by the new president of Taiwan, Mr. Lai, was a kind of new case of moderate foreign policy of Taiwan. You can take a look at his speech, not only in Chinese, but also in very beautiful English. So I really recommend you to take a look at the English version, at least for his incoming speech or inauguration speech. But what he made clear is he is not provoking China so much. Maybe you have some memory. President Chan Shui-bian, back to 2000, so almost 24 years ago. The President Chan Shui-bian, he was also coming from DPP, but try to make a lot of provocation against China, and that stimulate even United States and the President George Bush 43. So many people, not only the people in the mainland China, but also in the Washington or in any place in the world, had some worry. The new president, new Taiwan president, might be very provocative and stimulating to China and cross-strait relationship. But yesterday's speech was very moderate. This is my first point. So he indicates, maybe I can cite some very kind of bottom line or key points from his speech. What he said is, our government will uphold the 4 commitments: neither yield nor provoke, and maintain the status quo. Also, he said, I hope that China will face the reality of the Republic of China's existence, respect the choice of the people of Taiwan. And in his speech, he repeatedly mentioned about Republic of China Constitution. Some people, including mainland China, indicate it is not satisfactory because he didn't say anything about 92 consensus. This is a kind of terminology, very professional terminology we use, but China really want to get some confirmation from Taiwan side on 92 consensus. This is the bottom line. But Tsai Ing-wen only respect historical facts. There was some discussion over 92 consensus, and Lai Ching-te didn't say anything about 92 consensus. So from mainland China perspective, this inauguration speech might not be kind of B- or C+. But from my perspective, when we see the text overall, this is never provocative. And this is what they have to say as a new president and administration in Taiwan with 23 million people. So I think, I'm professor, so I always try to give some score to any kind of text. This is a very bad habit as professor. But, this speech is at least B+, right? So, or A-. So we have to accept this line of ideas, as a kind of representation of a Taiwan identity or Taiwanese identity. And new president Lai Ching-te, I believe, he tried to have some self-driving in coming 4 years. And that might be really important for him to keep his political legacy and political survival. And the second take, so, I started to talk a lot. So let me say the second point. So, now Taiwan is not so provocative, and also another very important thing is China-American relations. China-American relations at this moment is actually very stable. After last year, November's summit meeting in San Francisco between Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. I don't say they put end to US-China rivalry or competition, right? They still have a very high level of distrust to each other. And, United States have many economic regulations to weaken the base of Chinese technology and science. And China, also try to prepare a lot of economic, coercion measures, to make some retaliations against the United States and its partners. So I really don't think, they have fixed the relationship. But at the same time, they are now succeeding in managing the relationship between Beijing and Washington. So it also contributes to the regional stability along the Taiwan Strait. But what we really have to take care is we have to understand how China perceives the situation in recent days. For China and Chinese top leaders, last 4 years or 6 years, United States enhance deterrence capability a lot, also activates the alliance and partnership with Japan, with Taiwan, and also with many countries, including European countries, about the Taiwan contingency and about the peace and stability along the Taiwan Strait. So China might be very upset and might have more, might want to have more measures to change the situation for their better sake. But at this moment, they might have a lot of, kind of misunderstanding and misperception about the US and its partners' intention. That is a source of concern, even though United States and China start to have a not so bad relationship to manage the relations, and Taiwan's new president try to but try not to be provocative, the situation. But Chinese perception is something different. So, we have to come up with some measure, not only to deter China, but also to reassure China. But, that doesn't mean, we should give up our, preparations for any kind of contingency about Taiwan, right? We have to deter any kind of action from Chinese military activities. But also we have to take care more about the scenario, which might include economic blockades and economic coercion along the Taiwan Strait. And it is a very bad news. If China start to employ economic blockades or coercions to change the situation on Taiwan or on Taiwan affairs, many countries naturally be involved, not only Japan, but also UK and other countries in Europe and in Asia and in the world. We have to take care of that. But I think, last few years, we focused too much on military situation, military scenario, and military, possibilities of invasion to Taiwan. But, we have to deter, and also we have to prepare any kind of, scenario, including military, but also economic. So this is my take about today's situation. And let me go to Japan thing and the future of the Taiwan Strait in coming 10 minutes. So in Japan, actually, we start to take care of the situation over Taiwan so much. I believe my colleague, Charles, the next speaker, will show the map, and you will notice how close we are, how close Japan, Taiwan in the map. We are really close, especially, our Okinawa Islands, our tropical islands are really close to Taiwan. So we have a lot of sense of concerns about the situation in Taiwan. And actually, last a few years, we mainly discuss in the security discussion, we mainly discuss about the Taiwan, even though North Korea still has a lot of nuclear and missile capabilities, and we have to take care of them too. But politicians, policymakers, actually have focused so much on Taiwan. Why? The kind of big trigger for our attention is Indo-Pacific commander, American Indo-Pacific commander Davidson's remarks in U.S. Congress. And he said in 2021, he said in 6 years, the China, PRC, may invade to Taiwan. So it started to make a big kind of fuss in Tokyo's politics. I recently wrote an article on what happened in Japan last few years. Why? Because Japanese government finally decided to increase defense budget to the 2% of national GDP, and also Japanese government decided to introduce a counter-strike capability. So we are now in the process of big transformation or big ban of Japanese national security policy. So for that sake, I made a lot of interviews to top policymakers in Tokyo with my colleague, Dr. Ayumi Teraoka. So we published an article this year. So this is a Teraoka and Sahashi 2024 in the Pacific Affairs. You can take a look in the library if you want. But for that sake, I made 24 of interviews to Japanese top policymakers in the government and also MP. Most people are MP, member of parliament. And many people said Davidson's speech that in 6 years, China might invade to Taiwan, make a big alarm to their mindset. So that was a kind of that helped them to shape their ideas and to support the very radical reform of Japanese security policy. So Japan has a really big, sense of concerns on Taiwan, and Japan started to be a kind of new player, strategically in the Taiwan Strait. But what Japan is doing is, to team up with US more. So and they start to United States and Japan start to make a really high level of interoperability more in the last few years, and maybe more coming in coming years. So this is a situation. So what will happen in next few years? I think the biggest game changer is Trump or American presidential election. I don't believe, in coming 6 months, some big things will happen. I don't think so. I don't think so. China is still wait and see who will win in U.S. presidential election. So they have a good reason to wait and see, right, in Beijing. But my concern is not Biden. If Biden is elected, of course we have to take a look at the U.S. politics. Trump may not support the election result, so that is our concern. But beyond that, if Biden is elected, he may have a kind of balanced stance to the situation of Taiwan. So not big change. Might be fine. U.S. still has a big intent to restrain Taiwan and China simultaneously. So, U.S. might work as stability seeker in this situation. But if Trump is elected, uncertain stance toward Taiwan is a problem. He is very unclear on his stance to Taiwan in his first administration. And during the campaign, he is again very unclear on his stance to Taiwan. So that is first concern. The second concern is actually, Trump camp people, the future staff of Trump in White House, National Security Council, and also in Pentagon and also in State Department, they might be more hawkish to China. That might be fine for Taiwan security, you may think, but my concern is they might be very demanding to Taiwan. To ask them to increase defense budget very radically, to purchase US arms more. So that might make some distance between Taipei and Washington. That is my concern. In Taiwan, there is a kind of sense of, say, uneasiness to United States. So after Trump is elected, I think such a sense among Taiwanese might be strengthened, and that gap between Taipei and Washington could be a new problem, and maybe Taiwanese people want to see more role from Japan, but Japan is not so much prepared to take more responsibility, militarily especially, to the situation in Taiwan. So that could be a sense of kind of a source of concern. But anyway, this is a concern for the future. So Trump could be a game changer. So wrapping up my presentation. So as I said, the situation at this moment or in coming 6 months might be fine, might be stable, at least better than next year. But we have to take a look at the situation along the Taiwan Strait very closely, because if something happened militarily or economically, that really have big impact on the people, on our people, not only Taiwanese people, but also our people, our economy, and our society, right? So, I think today I have many, people listening my, very shabby presentation from Europe. But I think European friends, Taiwan might sound very far away. Very beautiful democratic country, democratic cities and islands. But but also you may also feel, it is very remote, very far away. But I think you have to take a more closer look to the situation over Taiwan. And finally, I think how should we view Taiwan's position in international relations? This is actually a very important question. Taiwan is now even not having a observer status like in World Health Assembly. So that is a concern. But also maybe we also want to have a more partnership with Taiwan's friend in the multilateral fora, even Taiwan or Taipei as observer. So we really need to come up with better ideas. Of course, but I don't think we have to invite Taiwan to AUKUS at this moment. I don't think so, right? In the very future, Taiwan might be welcome to join the CPTPP. But at this moment, I think now it is more important to have a more meaningful, substantial partnership with Taiwan in many situations, right? In a kind of functional cooperation. We really, don't have enough, frameworks to have cooperation with Taiwanese counterparts. So I think, we don't need to aim very, high objectives, high goal, very difficult goals, but maybe we have to take a kind of first step, second step from, the things we can do very easy or relatively easy with the Taiwan's counterpart in many functional areas. And that might make kind of very important for us to achieve the peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait too. So this is so I want to say thank you again for listening to my presentation, and I really want to hear your opinions, questions in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Ryo, thank you so much for that presentation, in particular on the Trump aspect, because I have always thought that Trump is very hawkish on China, and so the Taiwan stance wouldn't change. But what you say about how demanding they would be on Taipei was really interesting, and what that might trigger in terms of Taipei-Washington relations. Let's discuss all of this a bit more in a bit. Charlie, let me hand over to you for now.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm going to look at a couple of things. One is because there's been a lot of talk about a possible invasion or existential blockade of Taiwan. And I'd like to look at the conditions that would have to be satisfied for that to be carried out by the Chinese Communist Party. I think we should also look at, and I believe that neither blockade nor invasion will go ahead, incidentally. But then I like to look at, in the absence of that, what is likely to happen over the next decade, and then finally what this means for foreign countries. Thank you for putting up that map. I think it's a map with special Chinese characteristics, and I think it gives a very good idea of why China feels so in need of ensuring that it controls the South China Sea and getting back Taiwan because of its own security feelings. So let me just start then with a couple of conditions that would need to be satisfied before invasion or blockade becomes possible. And first, on the military side, I mean, I think blockade could be carried out now. I think the PLA Navy, with a combination of its Coast Guard, its militia, and its missile capabilities, could impose a blockade on Taiwan. But then you have to consider what the United States reaction to that would be, including to threats into China and the Malacca Straits and the Sunda Straits. It could easily badly interfere with the Chinese economy. And a blockade really does lead to a risk of all-out war. But it is possible. I think there are other good reasons as to why it won't happen. But when it comes to invasion, I don't think the Chinese military is going to invade unless it is very, very confident indeed that it can carry out success in a short time. And that is, I think, a long way off. It's not just that the seas are very difficult. It's only a couple of months a year that they're calm enough for that sort of invasion. There are only 14 beaches you can land on, and they're much more easily defended than if Taiwan was wide open. Taiwan is building up its porcupine defense, even though there's going to be a massive inequality in terms of conventional forces, it doesn't make it easy to take the island. Then you have to think, well, what would the US do? It's going to have plenty of warning that an invasion is imminent. You have probably military people tell me a need to mobilize somewhere in the region of up to 2 million people, 2 million men, to launch a successful invasion. And even if you do manage to get ashore, then what happens? What will the resistance be like? This is one enormous gamble. And if Xi Jinping and the Communist Party, if they fail, then I think they fall. So I think that invasion is actually, I'm not with Admiral Brett Davidson on this one. I don't think it is likely in the next few years. Another condition that, and the second perhaps the most important condition for an invasion or an existential blockade would be that Taiwan ceases to be economically important to the world. Of course, that's particularly with reference to semiconductors, but also wider, and unimportant economically to China. So there I think we have to look at the question of TSMC, as we all know, produces around about 90% of the world's advanced semiconductor chips, and around about 50% of conventional. How easy is it going to be either for China to replace that, or indeed for the US, which is setting up and getting TSMC to set up plants in Arizona, etc. But how easy is that to do in the next decade, in effect, to make Taiwan marginal in terms of semiconductor production? I suggest actually it won't be possible, but other experts may disagree. The second thing is that Taiwan exports to China. I think at its height in 2021, it was 189 billion worth of exports, most of those components. So if that ceases because there's an invasion or blockade, imagine the effect on the Chinese economy, because you can multiply that by, I don't know, 10, 20. All those components go into products on the Chinese mainland, which either go into use on the Chinese mainland or are exported. That's going to be a massive economic attack on the Chinese global economy and global economy. But it gets worse than that, and I think this is why the economic argument is so strong against invasion. What's going to happen to shipping and insurance rates? 30% of global shipping trade currently goes through the Taiwan Straits. Well, it doesn't take a genius to work out that insurance will almost certainly not be available, and ships are not going to be risked by their owners going through that. So think of the economic disruption that causes. What will happen to trade and investment with Western countries? It's going to dry up. And that's before sanctions come into play. And there will be sanctions, not just by the US, but I think by Europe. Even Switzerland said it would impose sanctions to the degree that the EU imposes sanctions. So Switzerland's going down that. I think you can take the threat quite seriously. So, and it's not just sanctions, of course. There could be constrictions on food supply to China, which is and resources supply from the US, Australia, and others. So the result of all that, what was that going to be? It's going to be, it would be an enormous global crash. Various people have tried to calculate how big that would be, and it ranges from sort of 4 to 10% or whatever of global economy. I think it'll be probably larger than that. But more importantly, perhaps from the Chinese Communist Party's point of view, just think of what the effect will be on the Chinese economy. It'll crash big time. There is, even in 10 years' time, will there be a sufficient social security net in China to offset the effects on the Chinese people of unemployment, hunger, etc. I think given the way the Chinese economic model is going, and it's reached, I think, the limits of its effectiveness, which is what Xi Jinping declared in 2013 at the third plenum, when he said, echoing Wen Jiabao, that the Chinese economy was unbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable, hence the 2013 reforms. Well, they haven't been implemented, and we'll see what the third plenum in July brings forth. But I think the economic model we've seen has plateaued. And I don't think, therefore, we're going to see a really deep social security net in China in the next decade. In the absence of that, then, as I say, there will be mass unemployment, mass hunger, and mass anger. And guess where that gets directed? Because all good things come from the Communist Party, but all bad things have to be laid at its door. Would the Communist Party survive that? I think it's a moot point. And I always think of the Delphic Oracle and the example of Croesus, who consulted it when he wanted to invade I think it was the Persians. And the Delphic Oracle says, well, if Croesus goes to war, he will destroy a great empire. And he duly did, his own. And that's, I think, was what would happen to the Chinese Communist Party. At which point people say, yes, but history is littered with examples of politicians who do foolish things. Look at Putin and the invasion of Ukraine. That's not turned out too well so far. Why wouldn't Xi Jinping, if things were getting economically bad, there's a lot of unrest in China, go into Taiwan? I just don't think that's a gamble he'd take, because it's not a gamble. What it would do, as I've already said, is simply speed up big time the economic mess that already would have existed, and increase the threat to the CCP's hold on power. I'm sure he can work that one out. So what are we going to see then in the absence of blockade and invasion? Because I don't think the next 10 years are going to be all sweetness and light. And indeed, what we've seen so far from the CCP's reaction to William Lai's inauguration speech, it's been fairly as one might expect, cutting. But the CCP has a problem. I mean, the latest poll from mid last year, I think, it's Taiwanese people, 67% consider themselves to be Taiwanese, 28% consider themselves to be Taiwanese and Chinese, and only 3% consider themselves to be Chinese. And when a year or two earlier, the Taiwanese people were polled on the question of unification, only 6.5% wanted unification. So that's not, I suggest, going to change much over the next decade. And therefore, in the absence of invasion and blockade, China and the Communist Party really has very little alternative other than to continue with the sort of pressure that it's been doing, threatening invasion, military posturing, but not actually carrying it out. More specifically, what are we likely to see? And it'd be interesting to see in the question and answers whether people can come up with other things. But the things that immediately occurred to me, and this isn't rocket science, I suppose, is far more efforts to undermine the DPP and play divide and rule with the KMT and the TPP, against setting them against the DPP. I think we're going to see a lot more grey zone, if that's the right word, warfare, cyber attacks on the government, on possibly on the infrastructure, have a lot more interference by the United Front. Whether that will go, so how far that will go in terms of sort of in the long term, I suppose it could even sort of foment insurrection, but I think that's going to be a long way down the line. Other things, well, increase Taiwan's global isolation. It's down now to 13 diplomatic allies. That will probably fall, and ensure that Taiwan in other international organizations is kept out. I think we'll see a revamping of the 2005 secession law. A number of Chinese legislators have already talked about that, and that may almost certainly will, I think, include a version of the Article 38 of the Hong Kong security laws, which make extraterritorial the going against basically the CCP's line on Hong Kong, or in this case, Taiwan. There have been prosecutions already under the secession law of Taiwanese living in the PRC. There will be more, and there will be more worldwide if this extraterritoriality comes in. We'll see more pressure on Taiwanese companies for sure. There already have been one or two occasions where Taiwanese companies have been subject to fines and investigations. These companies supported the DPP with financial contributions. I think they also supported the KMT, but the fact is they supported the DPP too. I think we're going to see a lot more military activity, including longer temporary blockades while live fire exercises are conducted. And then right further down the line, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that Jinmen and Matsu, the two island close to the Chinese mainland and currently part of Taiwan, that they would spontaneously, in strong inverted commas, demand reunification, more inverted commas, with the motherland. They are vulnerable to a much smaller blockade, and indeed the withdrawal of resources and services. So that could be there. And even further down the line, what about seizing the Pratas Islands, Dongsha, which is halfway between Hong Kong and Taiwan? It has a very small Taiwanese airfield and garrison on it. Would doing that be sufficient to bring the United States in militarily into a conflict? Interesting question. So there's a lot there that could be done vis-a-vis Taiwan, and there's a lot more that I think will be coming in the next decade towards foreigners, increasing sanctions on foreigners who cross China's red lines, in maybe pressure on Chinese companies to make a choice, but sorry, foreign companies to make a choice between operating in Taiwan and having operations in the mainland in Taiwan. You can have one, but not the other. I think there's going to be much harsher reactions to military overflights and sailings through the Taiwan Straits, particularly, I suspect, on non-American countries. We've already seen some very dangerous maneuvers in front of Canadian, Australian aircraft and helicopters. Let's hope there's not an accident. But I think we're going to see a lot more of that sort of military action. And I think we'll see a lot more threats to countries in the way that Lithuania was. China has clearly read Thucydides, not because of the Thucydides claptrap, but because of the Melian dialogue, where the basis of that is the powerful countries do as they will, and the small countries just have to put up with it. So watch out, small countries. Vis-a-vis your Taiwan will be the message from Beijing. What does that mean for foreign countries, and what should we be doing? Then I think, first of all, we shouldn't exacerbate the situation. I think and that means close consultation with Taiwan, and not pushing Taiwan into situations which are disadvantageous, because we in our countries don't fully appreciate the dynamics, etc. I mean, the obvious example is it doesn't probably help to refer to Taiwan as an independent country. I have to say, William Lai got very, very close to it in his inauguration speech. But it's certainly we should be very closely working with Taiwan not to upset the apple cart. But that said, I think we should certainly be pushing for inclusion of Taiwan in organizations, international organizations, which benefit global goods. It's probably far too far to push for Taiwan's inclusion in political organizations, but things like global health, the global economy, the development, these are things where Taiwan should be included, because it has a very relevant contribution to make. I think that our countries should quietly help Taiwan to build up its porcupine defenses, so that it can defend itself. All peoples have the right to defend themselves. And I think probably most importantly of all, through quiet diplomacy, I think our countries should be making it eminently clear to the CCP that invasion or existential blockade will result in sanctions. It will result in economic suicide. It is, in a sense, mutually assured destruction. We've had that for years in the nuclear sphere. But I think we need to ensure for Taiwan, over Taiwan, that the Chinese fully understand that that is what will happen. That is the most effective form of deterrence. So we need to mean it too. And finally, we really need to explain to our own nations, to our own peoples, why Taiwan matters. This is, and that I think links into the fact that there really is a new Cold War, that China really does see the world in that way, and really is trying to knock America off its perch and change the way that global governance acts in terms of benefiting China's interests and values, as opposed to what is already in existence. And this sounds, I know, a little bit over the top, but when even Chatham House and Robin Niblett, who's the director there, entitles his new book "The New Cold War," then I think we need to sit up. And it's not just a matter of defending the right of 23 million people to choose their own system and to have their own values. It's not just a matter of human rights. Those things are very, very important. but it's also a matter of our own security. Look at that map. Look at the first island chain, the second island chain. Do we wish China to dominate the Western Pacific and ultimately the whole of the Pacific? It's not just a matter of that, also it's a matter of our economic prosperity. I've already talked about TSMC and semiconductors, but Taiwan plays a really quite important role in the global economy. So I'll stop there. That's possibly a little bit short, which is a good thing, and because it allows far more time for questions and possibly relevant answers.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Yes, we're not letting you go just yet. Very much enjoyed the Thucydides claptrap phrase as well. For those of you who are not British, I think Charlie's basically saying that the Thucydides trap is not so much to be respected as a theory, and to find out more about that, you can read his latest on The Spectator as well. I'm going to go to audience questions soon, so please start thinking about what you would like to ask our guests and raise your hand through Zoom. But first of all, I'll just start with a couple of questions of my own. Ryo and Charlie, I think many people will have been reassured by your presentations in the sense that there is no immediate likelihood of invasion, that perhaps the Davidson timeline is not so much not so firm, I think, as he made it out to be, that there will be an invasion certainly in the next year, or maybe even by 2027. But I wanted to ask you both, what about the chances of an accidental escalation or something straying beyond China's red line in a way that the West perhaps didn't intend? So, for example, I'm thinking about the tensions in the South China Sea that have been going on this year, or both of you have both talked about ways to include Taiwan in more economic organizations, for example. Could that be perceived as an aggressive act by Beijing? Ryo, perhaps you'd like to start.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that point. And yes, we cannot reject the possibility of accidental escalation. And it could start from something very tiny things, like, something happened in Jinmen, like last time. Last time, they really successfully managed the situation, I believe, between, cross straits bodies. But I think, something could lead to escalation. Maybe it couldn't be limited to the situation over Taiwan or Jinmen. Maybe, US and China may have some miscalculation to each other, starting from South China Sea, for example. And that could lead up to, kind of bad management of the situations over Taiwan. So, we cannot reject any possibility of escalation, accidental, escalation. But I think at this moment, the atmosphere between Washington and Beijing is not so bad to make some guardrail, as they say, to have a kind of, candid talk and, communication channel in the time of crisis. So I want to bet that possibility of successful management for accidental escalation. But as I say, now I think China have more reason, rationally, more reason to put their efforts to, as my, other speaker says, China has a really big reason to focus more on united front works, disinformation campaign to Taiwan and Taiwan's politics. So I think this is not a rational moment for them to change the situation.
Thank you, Ryo. And Charlie?
Yes, I agree. I mean, it's good that the American and Chinese militaries are talking a little bit more than they were before. And you think back 2001, the crisis was defused relatively rapidly. Yes, China's a lot more powerful and a lot more confident than then. But I think again, just imagine the economic consequences of this spiraling out of control. It doesn't take long before those consequences come home at a time when China's economy is not doing as well as the CCP would like. Now, some people say, yes, but is Xi Jinping really in control of the military, for instance? I mean, could the military escalate this? Well, I believe that he is. Just look at what he's done to the military since the 2015 reforms. Even implementing what he's done there, I think speaks quite tight control of the military. And look also at how he has replaced so many of the top generals, hundreds of them, and continues to do so. So that to me says, well, he's pretty powerful when it comes to the military.
But that was an incredible development last summer, actually, when he was doing that purge, Charlie, because there was reporting that he had found basically PLA armories emptied, rocket launchers that didn't quite have the right kind of lid to be used and that kind of stuff. So I do wonder, in the aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and what that's shown us about the Russian army, just how many holes there are in the PLA as well that we don't really know from the outside so much. Charlie, just picking up on that last point that you mentioned about the economy as well, we've got a question from Aaron about well, the economy in China at the moment. Will the CCP invade Taiwan given the slowing economy? So perhaps a chance to elaborate on that from both of you, if that's all right. Ryo, you feel free to start.
Sorry, who's starting?
Yeah, go on, Charlie.
Maybe, yeah,
right.
maybe Charlie, you can go first. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. I've wrote a paper on this back in November. So a free piece of advertising for the Council on Geostrategy. Go onto the website and read it. It's called something like Plateau China. I hate the phrase peak China because peaks go up and down very quickly, whereas plateaus go up and then stay at that height for quite some time. They can then fall away very quickly as well, or they can dribble off into a plane. Either way, China is, whichever form of plateau it is, China, I think, is here as a powerful economic force for the foreseeable future. But I mean, the essence of that paper says, back in 2013, Xi Jinping himself said that the Chinese economic model was unbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable. And that's why he introduced 60 chapters of reforms and 336 individual reforms, etc. So you have to ask the question, well, to what degree have they been implemented? And it's not difficult to find some very influential Chinese, both think tanks and individuals like Liu Jiwei and Zhou Xiaochuan and others in the economic and financial world who say they haven't been implemented. At which point we have to conclude that what was originally described as unbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable remains in that situation. And I think that is correct when it comes to what I would identify as the four big problems facing China's economy: debt, obviously, demographics, water, lack of water, third, and fourthly, an insufficiently educated population to sustain a high-tech developing economy over the long term. Then I don't think that the economic model is sufficient to deal with that, not least for political reasons. And there I would put forward four political reasons, which I think, well, there are many, but four things, four helpers, which Xi Jinping has deliberately, for political reasons, gotten rid of. One is an independent judiciary to put trust in the system. Another is an independent press to monitor the system, corruption, for instance. So civil society has been totally controlled, and yet civil society is where so much pressure and ideas come from. It never comes from government. I've been part of a government. Governments react. They don't say we got to sort. Here's a whole lot of bright ideas. Much. And finally, some form of political accountability. so that you know that if you don't deliver economically and in welfare, you're out. None of that's possible. Leninist governments have to control all economic levers. Ultimately, this is a matter of political reform as much as anything else. That is why I think it's right to talk about plateau China rather than this ever-increasing graph that goes on up.
Ryo, would you like to add anything?
No, I totally agree about his analysis on the Chinese economy. So let me add another kind of point relating to the Chinese economy. So some people, especially in the Washington, start to argue if China's economy is going to be weakened, after the peak China, that might increase the chance of war for the Beijing leaders. And some people support this idea, and like Professor Hal Brands and Michael Beckley recently wrote a book on this topic, and they say it's a danger zone. But I think many people, at least in Tokyo or maybe in London too, don't support this thesis, right? Because even after the peak China, or some weakness in Chinese economy, kind of downward trend, I think Chinese top leaders may want to focus more on domestic issue and domestic stability. So because as he said, they have to tackle against many agenda domestically in pushing up the Chinese economy. So they really don't have a kind of time or resource to focus on external affairs. So we, for this thesis, for this, problem, I think I really agree with Professor Taylor Flever's argument when he published the book in the 2005. And what he said is like in 1990s, when China had many troubles in domestic politics and also external policies, they tried to stabilize the relation with neighbors and try to focus more on domestic politics. So I think, that could be still the kind of the rules we can apply to, the prospect of Chinese leadership, even in the times of, weakened economy in China.
Yes, absolutely. And you often hear from Western interlocutors as well that China might do this as a distraction, might invade Taiwan as a distraction from domestic problems of economy or legitimacy. But I agree with you, Ryo. It strikes me that it's a democratic certain type of psychology to think that perhaps in an election campaign you can distract with other issues, but for the Chinese system it doesn't really work like that. You both also mentioned getting Europe on board. I wondered how you think that the best way to do that is, because we're a few years into the Russian invasion now, and I think there's a lot of war fatigue, certainly in terms of how much public opinion cares about the war, not necessarily in terms of the commitment of the countries, but it has also had a big impact in terms of living standards. For example, in the UK, much of the inflation that we've seen in the last few years has come from rising energy costs, rising fertilizer costs, the sanctions as well. So if it's a question of Taiwan, which is even further from Europe and less immediate, as Ryo, you've mentioned, what is the way to get Europeans to care? Yeah, that's the question. So Charlie, perhaps you'd like to start.
Well, yes, not easy, and one has to take one's hat off to the Chinese Communist Party for getting Europeans to care far more than they did. I mean, its treatment of Lithuania was a case in point, and I think it told the Europeans quite a lot about the way China operates in the world. Another point, a sort of preliminary point, is we've got to be clear what we're talking about when we're talking about Europe. Are we talking about the European or the EU in particular? Are we talking about the European Commission or the member states? Because the member states have competence when it comes to foreign affairs, but the Commission has competence when it comes to trade and decisions on that. So there is a dichotomy there, but I think we're probably talking more about the way individual states react. and there I think, with the exception of Hungary and Serbia, I'm talking outside the European Union here, most East European and Central European states who've experienced life under communism are far more wary of China and therefore more supportive of Taiwan. And in many ways, they have less to lose. It's the countries like France, Germany, Italy, UK, who fear Chinese retaliation for support for Taiwan. I have to say that is exaggerated, the sort of pressures that China can put on Europe. I mean, just a simple question, but whose trade deficit is, I mean, who exports more to whom? In a trade war, who stands more to lose? I looked at this question, incidentally, back a few years. Again, go onto the Council of Geostrategy's website and read the paper. It's called Chinese Threats, Policy Making Amidst Chinese Pressure. And looking at 6 areas: exports to China, investment from China, City of London services, financial services, students, tourists, and cooperation on climate change. In all areas, the bark is far, far worse than its bite. And just one quick illustration of that is that any country that's been in the diplomatic doghouse with China has seen its exports rise during that time. In fact, with the UK, to take us, we were in the doghouse 2010 to 2012 because of Cameron and Nick Clegg meeting the Dalai Lama. Our exports rose. And during the golden era, spelt with 3 R's, it fell. Our exports fell. What does that tell you? Well, it tells you that politics ain't that important when it comes to exports.
Mm.
Now, there are symbolic areas where China will hit you, brandy, etc., Australian wine, but Australia generally did not suffer.
Ryo.
Yeah, to bring European countries to the table, I think 2 things, two agenda might be very attractive. First agenda might be the evacuations of European people in the time of crisis or contingency along Taiwan. You know, you have many people, many European people having a tourism or works or study in Taiwan and also in China and in East Asia. You know, when something happens along the Taiwan Strait, you know, we have to evacuate all non-combatants, not only from, you know, the Taiwan, but also maybe many people want to evacuate even from mainland China. So we really need to coordinate, you know, our air power, right? So, you know, of course, Japan is very close and the South Korea is really close to, you know, Taiwan, China, but, you know, our air power to evacuate people are not so much. So maybe we really need to think more intelligently, you know, how can we, you know, cope with the flow of people running away from Taiwan, mainland China, in the time of contingency. But, you know, at this moment, I haven't heard good ideas, you know, to coordinate, you know, such effort in the time of crisis. I think, you know, the people we have to evacuate, maybe, you know, especially foreign people evacuating from the area might be more from Ukrainian war. So we have to take this very seriously. And the second things, maybe we can talk, I mean, among the European people, Japanese people, Taiwanese people, or Asian people about Taiwan and China should be the Chinese work in the gray zone, including disinformation campaign or United Front works. You know, we have many things. And actually, the good thing, academically, good thing is Taiwanese think tanks and Taiwanese professors know these things really well. So we can learn from them too. And, you know, because the Chinese government try to employ the same strategy and tactics in, you know, in the other, you know, bilateral relations. So we can learn a lot from what, you know, Chinese government do does against Taiwan. And the Taiwan people study them really well. So maybe, we can have a more discussion. We can learn a lot from Taiwanese professors, think tanks, and research institutions about this. So I think people's evacuation and the gray zone, cooperation and kind of academic learning from Taiwanese counterpart might be, something we can start together about this topic.
And Ryo, that links onto actually a question from the audience here about how Japanese domestic political opinion thinks about Taiwan. Is there much sympathy there? If you can comment on that.
Japanese and Taiwanese are now in a kind of big romance, right? We love each other. So, according to the public polls, many Japanese people really love Taiwanese people, and Taiwanese people really love Japanese people. So, in the public polls, what we can get is, both people love each other. It's a good romance. But having said that, I'm really not so sure how many Japanese really want to get militarily involved to the situations in the Taiwan island if something happened, right? I think the people may want our government to focus more first on the Japanese people evacuation from Taiwan and China. And the second, they really want to see our government to protect the people in our southwestern islands, which might be in the war theater when something happened in Taiwan. So, the Japanese SDF and Japanese government have to protect the people and our national territory in southwestern islands. So, we are really split, and I don't know how Japanese government would react to, the SDF direct military involvement to the situation in Taiwan. Of course, Japanese government may want to employ the kind of new interpretation of Article 9 in our constitutions, and may want to say we can have rear area cooperation, logistical cooperation to U.S. military combating in the area. And maybe, some people may want to employ another legal schemes to enable Japanese SDF to support and help American military or international military activity in the region. But I'm not so sure about, how Japanese people would react, how they would react. And just one thing, sorry, Charles, just one thing. So, and this is just one sentence, but we, Japanese sometimes start to discuss, we have too much expectation from Taiwanese people. How can we, manage the expectation? If we take a look at the public poll in Taiwan, actually many people don't say U.S. Would come to save Taiwanese. Like, I think if my memory is correct, just a 30% kind of. But the majority of people say Japan would come to save us, right? So that might not be true, right? First, we don't have that capacity. Second, as I said, I'm not so sure Japan people would keep such a high resolve to defend Taiwan if something really happened. But, the expectation from Taiwanese people tend to be more than we imagine in Japan. So this is a kind of expectation gap between two, but a very interesting academic topic too. Sorry, Chai.
No, I just want to make the very obvious point that if Taiwan was forcibly taken back by China, of course, the next target would be the Senkaku Islands. So Japan has a very strong interest, apart from many other very good interests, why it should not.
Just one sentence. So as maybe many of you know, Senkaku, our island, is a part of Taiwan province. So, we suspect, not next target, but actually Senkaku might be the simultaneous target if something happened, even, it might be possible. That is my point. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Charlie, there's a question here about China's popular zeal for national reunification. So I guess when it comes to growing nationalism within China, you might say that the CCP does not actively want to take this step just yet, that Xi Jinping thinks that it might be self-destructive. But what about people? And we have seen that Chinese nationalists are capable of turning their ire onto the government itself and forcing them into harder positions.
Yes, as I think you in some of your broadcasts have said, Cindy, the nationalism is very strong, and people do believe, because this is what they've been led to believe from the moment they go to school, and is that Taiwan is an integral part of China, and therefore unification or reunification, as they say, is absolutely essential. And of course, the Communist Party would say it's part of a historical, unavoidable, inevitable historical process. You can subscribe to the Communist Party's dialectics on history if you want. But there's something that they've definitely encouraged, and something which you're right, does occasionally turn around to bite them when the party does not pursue policies, not just on Taiwan, which are sufficiently nationalistic, and we saw that, for instance, when there was rioting against Japanese interests back in I'm going to say 2005, but on other occasions. But that said, I don't think that the party is ever going to be in a position where it has to give way to any pressure group within China. It's strong enough to resist that. If things got really, really bad, well, you can throw some scraps of meat to the lion, for instance, by ensuring reunification with Jinmen and Mazu. That's a step. Or by taking the Pratas Islands, Dongsha. That would at least assuage them for some time. But I don't think the party is actually needs, certainly not as we can see at the moment, to bow to the nationalists.
Now, Ryo, we have a question here about Russians' involvement if China invades Taiwan. So given that they're already in this kind of alliance and Russia is in active warfare in Ukraine. And then there's also, I guess I would add to that as well, that we see that in China's friendship with Russia, this desire to diversify its supply chains away from the naval routes that Charlie was mentioning that the Americans control so well. So I guess, is it just a matter of time that China and Russia's friendship would lead to a more hardline position on Taiwan from the Chinese side? So that's kind of two questions there, Ryo.
Yeah, that is very interesting. But, of course, we have really big concerns on the kind of partnership among authoritarian states, including China, Russia, North Korea, right? That start to be very apparent. They collaborate each other, and they are not shy, to how can I say, not to pursue the partnership. But about China-Russia relationship, I don't think Russia could provide enough sufficient support to China under the Ukrainian war, and Taiwan contingency happened, right? Russia cannot be such a big provider except energy, except gas, right? So I think that is a kind of weakness of this partnership. Of course, the Russia can be a really good partner with moral support, but in the time of Ukrainian war, Russia has a big limitation in terms of providing support, material support to China, except energy. But actually, we also have to take another side of the coin, right? Japan, US, Taiwan, and international community. How can they team up their efforts in the time of Taiwan contingency. You know, we tend to see kind of military collaboration, but I think we also have to take a look at the possibility of defense industry collaboration or cooperation, right? Which we already see in the Ukrainian war, right? So I think, you know, Japanese, American, and other allied governments already started the kind of candid discussion over the possible, you know, collaboration in terms of defense industry, and you know, and providing kind of weapons and bullets and missiles in the time of crisis. And maybe that kind of discussion might be accelerated in the future. So I think, you know, even though we start to see a more robust collaboration between China and Russia, but I think the American side, I mean, American alliance network side still have some advantage in terms of providing, you know, substantial support.
Yeah, significant advantage, I would say. Charlie, do you want to add anything on that, or?
Yeah, I don't think that Russia, Ukraine is that relevant to what's going to happen. I mean, you know, it's a very different type of war for a start. I'm sure that China is nevertheless learning a lot. But as I started off, I just don't think that invasion or blockade is a realistic proposition anyway. So it doesn't matter what lessons you're learning in that sense. Again, in terms of defense cooperation between China and Russia, China's pretty much got all that it needs now from Russia in terms of the technologies. Yeah, maybe a little bit more on engines and one or two other things, but that's, I think, pretty much there. Yes, it could probably learn a little bit more from Russia and joint ops and how to work more closely between the various forces. Russia's got a little bit more experience of actually fighting, but that's, again, if invasion is not really on the cards, it doesn't matter so much. The other thing, I mean, and sort of dependence, does China really want to be dependent on Russia for its energy needs? It's always been very careful to balance them. It doesn't want to be, I don't think it trusts Russia sufficient to do that. So again, it wants to keep oil and gas flowing from other parts of the Middle East, Namibia or wherever. And finally, you know, this question, well, will one day the Arctic route be so open that the Taiwan Straits become less important? Well, that's a long way ahead anyway. I have some doubts as to the volumes of traffic that could go through that. I mean, it's still going to be damn cold up there, and there's going to be a lot of ice, and that makes it far less reliable for a large chunk of the year. So in a time frame that's realistic, Xi Jinping will by 2049 be 96. I don't think the Arctic is possibly going to help him by then.
We've got a very short question here, which is really interesting. It's one that we don't often talk about in this context, but you know, I think it's interesting, which is just, are there long-term hopes for Taiwan's official independence? Is that ever even on the cards with things as they are currently are? Ryo, maybe you'd like to, I don't know if either of you would like to take that.
I mean, I would just jump in and say, just look at William Lai's speech. He doesn't use the word independence, but he talks about the nation and sovereignty, etc. What's in a word? Well, quite a lot. I think if you started mouthing the word independence, the Chinese Communist Party has said that would be sufficient. I think it knows it can't invade and doesn't want to invade. It really doesn't want anyone to use the independence word. But short of that, it has to tolerate what he's just said. And you know, to all intents and purposes, Taiwan is an independent country. It meets the four conditions of the 1933 Montevideo Convention. in entirety. It's got a population, it's got a government, it's got the capacity of making foreign relations, and it's got a defined territory. It is an independent country, we just don't call it such, and I don't think it's that important.
From my perspective, what I can say is I don't think new president Lai will make any kind of independence declarations in the coming years. That is unnecessary, politically unnecessary. So what he said in his speech, inauguration speech, is very correct. He says here is Republic of China and Republic of China constitutions, and PRC. You have to look this reality. So this is what he say, and this is what he can say, and this is what he should say. So I really don't think he will go beyond this point. He doesn't need that politically.
Thank you. There's some questions as well about the US domestic dynamics at play here when it comes to Taiwan. So one question is about who are the lobby groups in the US that are influential and having a role in the US's position on the Indo-Pacific. And another question about what elites think about China when it comes to the US. I don't know if either of you would want to take a stab at that, because it's much more American domestic.
Well, I don't spend my time studying the American politics. I spend my time studying Chinese politics. And so I suspect all I can say is very obvious that the military is important in the debate, and business is always important in any debate. But I think what is clear about China policy generally in the United States is that it's pretty much bipartisan. I don't see a great deal of difference between the approaches of either party. Of course, then we have the Trump, the Trump factor, and as we know, he can throw grenades around fairly indiscriminately, sometimes with quite considerable accuracy, and we should applaud. Sometimes not so accurate.
Yeah. Yes. Actually, I'm specialized more on the American side, so I have to speak about this. But as far as I know, first of all, Taiwanese lobby in the U.S. Congress and also to the U.S. government are really actually getting stronger recently, especially on the Democrats in the U.S. Congress. And actually, they worked very well with Mrs. Nancy Pelosi and her office. So this is very apparent, and many studies on that. But what I want to say is, lobbying is not so much crucial at this moment. Right? Last 10 years, we saw big change on America's strategy to China and Taiwan. But I think the most influential driving force was not lobbying people. It is, I can say, the people are more motivated by their own strategic, vision. So as Charlie said, military people, U.S. government military people, U.S. government intelligence people, these people have more influence to form the new strategy toward China and also Taiwan. And also about Taiwan, there is a strong supporter now in the Congress, especially from GOP, Republican side. And I don't think they are so much influenced by Taiwanese lobbying people. They have their own ideology. They have their own ideas on PRC, and they found out Taiwan as a very important democracy in the world. And also they start to see Taiwan as something they have to defend. Right? So I think, now the policy, US policy are shaped mostly by their own, not by influenced by foreign lobby.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. Well, Ryo and Charlie, I think I'm going to bring this session to a close. We've answered an amazing amount of questions here, and I think the others, you touched on in your presentations or your answers in any case. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you to all of you for listening and watching at home, and thank you to the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation for hosting this session.